Hey guys, welcome back. In this part, we're going to set up the mesh maps like we would do in Substance Painter, and then add these into our material to start to be able to create edge wearing and different effects on this texture as well. So to bake these textures, what I'm going to do is take my unwelded mesh here, and I'm just going to press Shift and D on my keyboard to duplicate it, and press Escape to drop it back in its original position. For now, I'm going to turn off the visibility and the render visibility of all the other garments in my scene. And I'm just going to rename this mesh bake. And the reason for this is because I'm just going to collapse or delete all the material slots so that we're only baking one set of materials. And it will make our job a little bit easier. So I've selected this mesh. I've just deleted all those material slots by pressing the minus button. I'm just going to add a new one and call it bake for now. What we need to set up here as well, mainly for the ambient occlusion, is a lighting. So if we look at this, if I just put a kind of dark color on this and bring the roughness down, up, and we look at this, I'm going to my render view on the side, so choose the back of the camera, the one that looks like a little camera here, go to render engine and turn this to cycles, and then let's check that we're using in system. I'm going to turn off this GPU. Right. Set your render device to GPU. You can go into, just like I did, edit, preferences, system, and check the graphics cards that you want to use. If I look at this in render view now, this is a really dark scene. I've got one light like right here just shining down on the back of this. Ideally, we want a series of lights around this to get quite a soft light and some shadows visible for the baking of this ambient occlusion. And what I mean by this, if I go on this side to 3D view, so change that back from shader editor to 3D view, and just zoom out a bit, grab this light, press G to grab hold of it, and then just move it to the back, bring it down a bit. I'm just jumping in and out of front, back, and side views by clicking up here and just trying to position this light in a good spot, okay? Select the light, make the radius a little bigger so the light is softer, and just set it to maybe an intensity of about 80. And now we're just going to choose this light from above, press Shift and D, and just copy it onto like the four sides of our mesh. And we're going to get this kind of soft shadows forming in the creases. We're going to get darker shadows here. We're getting shadows under this. This is going to be how we bake the ambient occlusion map. We get like a nice shadow underneath this button. This won't be the light we use to render in, but for now, this really simple setup should get a good effect for the ambient occlusion. You want to make sure the lights are kind of a little lower down, so I'm going to select all of them. Go to this side of the screen, press G, press Z for the up and down the Z axis, and just let these travel down about the Z axis more into the middle. And this should be kind of okay to start to bake, okay? To bake the texture, we're going to go back into the shader editor, and I'm going to go back into just out of render view. I don't need this to be rendering right now. Select your mesh, and then let's look at our one material slot here, and I'm just going to add an image texture. Press Shift and A, search image texture, and then I'm going to create a new one. So create new, call this AO bake. We're going to set the resolution to 4K, so 4096 by 4096, and set this to tiled. When you've got all this set, the same settings as me, click OK. And instead of looking at this file browser right here, I'm going to change this to image editor. And under image editor, choose AO bake, and we have our one tile right here. But we actually need 3 tiles, because if I look at this in UV editor quickly, I just pressed A on my keyboard to select all the mesh. I actually have 3 tiles that I need to be baking with, okay? So I'm just going to jump back into layout mode. To create those tiles, press N on the keyboard to make this little side menu jump out, the N button, and go to image, and go to UDIM tiles, scroll down a little here, and if you selected tiles when we made this texture, you can click this plus button and add 2 more tiles and click under the count here, add 2, and then click OK. And now we have 3 tiles that we can bake on top of. So this is our 3 empty things that we want to now add the ambient occlusion baking to. So to bake this ambient occlusion, select this image texture. Make sure this is selected. Like if it's not selected, it's not highlighted in white. Select it. Go back to our render properties on the side. Scroll down and look under bake. Under bake type, change this to ambient occlusion. There's some margins set here for if this is moving beyond the edge of the UV island, so we can leave these settings as they are. For now, leave this as it is. The quality of this is affected by these render settings here. So under render, this is how long it will take to render. If this is set really high, it's going to take a long time. So I'm just going to set this to 2048 under max samples and leave the noise threshold as it is for now. And then just click bake. It'll take a moment to bake, so I will show you what it looks like when it's done. Okay, so this is baked now, and if we look here, we have a image texture with black and white information on it, and it's got shadows where shadows should be. So we can use this to create shadowing and things within our texture. Now that this is baked, we want to save this. So go to image, and if you see there's this little asterisk right here, this little star, that means this is not saved. So go to image, save this as, I'll go to my project folder here. I'll make a new folder called Blender Mesh Maps, Baked Maps, whatever you want to call it. And then this is called AO Bake with the UDIM after it. Leave this as it is and click Save as Image. And you'll see that little star has now disappeared because our image texture is saved. The next one we want to create is a curve map, but just to show you what this looks like, we connect this AO to base color. We've now got shadows. You see we also have shadows on the back of this because this is the back of the cloth, but we can fix this at a later stage. But for now, we've got some shadows applied to this material. Let's go back into shader view. Right. The next one we want to make is a curve map. And this one requires us setting up a few different nodes, but we're going to end up doing pretty much the same thing as we did before. I can delete all these nodes we've got here, and we'll start with just the material output. Okay, so press Shift and A and search for a geometry node. Search for a ramp. Put that next to it. Search for a gamma. And then search for an emission. And then we're just going to connect all this together. And we're going to do this with the pointiness node, the pointiness output here. So take pointiness, connect that into factor, connect factor into gamma, gamma into color, the color to the color, the emission to surface. And we need to look at this in cycles render view. So I'm going to go back into render view. And we are going to end up with this. It just looks white. For now, that's fine. Gamma needs to be connected color to color. So with this gamma value here, change this to 2. And you will see we start to get some edge visibility happening on this, this mesh on the side. To kind of increase this, we could go higher with our gamma option here. But we can also start to push into this color ramp. So I'm going to bring the black slider down and the white slider up. And our aim is to get a kind of mid-gray base with some gentle dark and light highlights around where there is curvature on this mesh. So where there's edges that are being turned and this type of thing, we're going to get a highlight. And then we can use this in our texturing to create edge wear, basically. So kind of bring these guys close together and create some contrast, between the light and the dark here. And what we can do as well is select our mesh, go to modifiers, click add modifier and add a subdivision. And if we add this subdivision modifier, we will get a softer edge look here. You see, This is with subdivision on, and this is with subdivision off. So this might help you get a better look. You might then need to kind of push further into these, this color ramp, for example. We can also add a solidify. So I'm going to add solidify and set this to quite a low value. So you see now we have a lot of thickness in this mesh. With the thickness value here, set this to 0.002 for 2 millimeters of thickness, and go back into the render view. So now we get this thickness on the edge. This might be too much, so 0.001. And then we can adjust again this color ramp. Not too far. Right. I think I'm going to set this gamma back to 2. Yeah. Okay, so now we've got some highlights and lowlights in this curvature map, especially on these creases and folds in the back. The fold has got a dark area to it, and the crease has got a highlight to it. This is what we want to now bake to a texture the same way we did with the ambient occlusion. So to do this, again, press Shift and A and search for an image texture. Click New. This time call this Curve Bake and select Tiled. Our resolution should be 4K and press OK. In our image editor in the bottom, we're going to select Curve Bake, and we'll have one tile again. Go back to your UDIM tiles on the side when you bring this menu out with the N key. Select plus, undercount, add 2, or however many UDIM tiles you need for your project, and click OK. With this selected now, again, make sure this texture is highlighted, it's selected. Go back to our render settings here. And instead of being set to ambient occlusion, we're going to set this to emit. And that's because we're using an emission shader right here, and that's creating this color. So we're going to just bake this emission. Click bake with this selected. If you don't have this selected, it says no valid selected objects, which is why it didn't work. So select this, click bake. It will take a few moments to bake these textures. Make sure you've got your mesh selected as well. And then I'll show you what this looks like when it has finished. Okay, so when this is finished, this is what your bake is going to look like. You'll have this kind of gray image texture here. The first time I ran this, it actually crashed, and I just deleted the solidify modifier. I don't think it was happy with that. So if you get an issue, check your modifiers, that might help. Again, we need to save this. I'm going to go to image, save as, mesh maps, and just click save image. And now this asterisk is gone, and we have saved this image texture. Now that we've got this, we can look back at our the objects that we were texturing before. So the one called thin unwelded, we were dealing with the material sort denim, or I was. And I'm just going to turn on the render and viewport visibility for this one. If I look at this in textured shaded, right, we can now start to add in all of these things to our material, to start to add in a lot of definition here. And then we can look at how to start grouping all of these nodes together. So I'm going to turn this back into file browser, and we're going to go to, we'll first take our normal map from our zip. So it was for the zip and the puckering that we needed this normal map. So I'm going to connect this back in again. But now we have a normal map for our base texture, which is being used to, you know, make the denim look bumpy. We have a bump map for this top stage, and that's all being fed into this normal here. So we need to blend another normal map in this connection at this point here. So this node space is going to start to get really complicated, and we're going to want to keep this as cleaned up as possible. So for now, I'm just going to drag these sets of nodes to the top of the screen, because if I look, this top stitch map and this denim is all my base color. So it is all to create a color. It's for the base material color here, okay? So I'm just going to press Control and J. Right. With Node Wrangler activated, press Control and J on the keyboard and you'll create a frame, or we can just frame up these nodes. With N selected, I can name this frame. I can call it base color, for example. Actually, that needs to go in label. Right. If you type that in label, this frame now has a label. I know that this is dealing with base color. If I select these guys and do the same Control and J, I can call this bump and normal to just start to like understand what's going on. These I could actually drop into this frame. Yeah. So drag them in and then you can add them into a frame, because these coordinates are to do with this textures here, right? This should help us keep things a little easier to work with. Now we want to work in this space here, the normal and the bump map, right? Take this normal output, this normal that we exported with our puckering on it, drag it into our node space, set it to UDIM because we want to read the UDIM tiles, and set it to non-color, right? If I want to just look at what this looks like on my mesh, sometimes this is useful to be able to do. So select a node, press Control and Shift on the keyboard, hold that down, and then left click on what you want to see. So if I want to see the color output of this node, click on color, and now this node is being output to view, and I can see, okay, this is my puckering map, my puckering stitches from my stitches from color. If I want to look at just this, I can press Control and Shift and left click on color, and I can now see what this this normal map here looks like. This works for any of the nodes, so just Control Shift and left click. Get used to this because it's really nice to look at what we're creating as things go along. So we can see what this mix looks like, just the mix. We can look at just this color ramp. We can look at just this. Control Shift left click. If I then want to look at my shader, my completely built up shader, Control Shift left click on BSDF, and now I'm viewing my entire shader again. So Control Shift left click on what it is that you want to see. Super useful. Right, this normal map, set the color space to non-color, make sure that this is UDIM tiles set up, press Shift and A and search for a normal map, or you could grab one and press Shift and D and duplicate it, but that is up to you. Oh. Right. Connect color to color, and then we need to have a mix here. We need to blend these two things together, so I'm just going to drag these back a little bit. Press Shift and A and search for a mix color. Drop that here. So that these colors are now being mixed, and connect both of these normal maps together. So if I want to see the output again of what this mix looks like, I can press Control, Shift, and left click on result, and I will see what the result of this is. And I basically want my puckering to be more visible than it currently is. And if I set this to multiply, this will be easier to blend these guys on top of each other. Maybe darken. Yes. So if I set this to darken and I feed into the bottom of it my normal map, into slot B, and I feed into slot A my tiled denim normal, I can now use this slider to turn on and off this puckering. So this can be used as a switch to turn on and off the puckering. You see that becomes visible and not visible. Again, to view this material output, zoom out, scroll with your mouse, and just right Control, Shift, left click on BSDF. And now we're going to look at our material again. Currently, the puckering isn't super visible because we're not looking at this in light. Look at this in rendered view. But we're going to make this more pronounced in the base color anyway. So let's just look at this in viewport shading just because it's a little bit quicker to render. And then we can start to add in our mesh maps that we just baked out. So go to your project folder and let's import these as image textures into this workspace. So we've got the puckering applied here. I'll just bring this down. And then we're going to bring in the ambient occlusion. So I'll just drag this over, set this to UDIM. We can leave this as sRGB. And again, to see what this looks like, press Control Shift left click. this will be good to add some shadows in, and we want to mix this here. We want to blend this into our base color. So I'm just going to create a bit more space if I can. Yeah. So again, we want to create another blend at this point here so we can connect this output with our base texture. So let's view the output of the BSDF again. So Control Shift and left click to view the output of this shader. Press Shift and A and search for mix and drop the mix color in the bottom here. I'm going to connect the output to base color, connect the mix from before into this mix as well, and then connect the ambient occlusion in the bottom. So again, to see how this is working, we can look at this factor. This is, one side is our one texture and one side is the other. This is half. We want to work with, let's do darken again. So choose darken. And we can see how this will affect our texture. And currently it doesn't look to be a lot at all. If we want to increase the intensity of this, we can press Shift and A and add a ramp in here. So press Shift and A, search for a ramp, and drop the color ramp in this space in the bottom. So now my ambient occlusion bake texture is connected to my color ramp. The color ramp is connected to this mix, which is mixing in my denim texture. This is very different than working with Substance Painter, but the result is going to be the same, if not better, if you guys are following along. So I hope you are okay at this point, because it's going to get worse. Drag the black side of the slider down, and you will see some of these shadows start to appear a bit darker. And you can bring this white slider up. Again, we can just look at this in use again Control Shift and left click just to look at the output of this, and maybe this is enough, but this is just going to give us a few shadows like around here under the belt loops, for example. There's going to be shadows like now visible in this texturing. So go back to your BSDF shader and reconnect everything. You'll see now we've actually got this black appeared in the bottom of our like the back of this fabric, but we can fix that as we go through. So don't worry about that now. The next thing we're going to do is add this curve, and then we're going to have to mix this in again. So just create some more space, drag the output over, drag the BSDF over, bring this mix maybe to here, and then bring the curve map in. Drop this just underneath the ambient occlusion. Again, set this to UDIM. Add a ramp next to it so we have some control. And then grab this mix, press Shift and D to duplicate it and drop it here so that this is connected, and then connect this mix here. So right, so the best way to set this up, if we just look at how these blend options are working, this one called darken in the top, I'm just going to change this to multiply, and with that set to multiply we see better these shadows. If I see that with darken, they're not as intense. If I set this to multiply, we get a lot more shadowing, so that is going to be set to multiply. Again, this can control at the intensity of that ambient occlusion. Next, where this one's called darken, we're going to turn it to screen. And right now, this is looking really gray. Okay, if I turn the intensity of this off, it's going to not be visible at all. But I want to be able to see these kind of faded edges, but get rid of the grayness in the background. So to do that, we're going to use the color ramp and just push down the black side until we get some kind of worn out edges here. And then just bring down as well the white side if you want to make those edges any sharper. And this is how we're going to start to build up wash effects on top of this denim. You can change the colors here as well. So if you don't want this to be black and you want it to be like more of a dark blue, we can set this to, you know, more of a blue color. And the same for the white. If the white is too light, we could bring this down to like a gray and give it a blue tint for example, and start to recolor as well some of this edge wear. But we want to kind of have an extreme washed look on this so that we can use the factoring to kind of taper it back. So if I set this here right now, and then I look at this factor option here, I can turn this on and off. I can, bring this up, bring this down. Same for this shadowing here. I can bring this shadowing up and shadowing down. And this is how we're going to build the controls in the shader in the end. So we've now connected, the mesh maps that we've baked, and then we're going to build more and more layers on top of this. For now, all of this can actually be brought into the same frame here because this is all for the base color. So I'm just going to drag this over and bring it down again and just try to keep things a bit organized so we can see what we're blending together. Then if I look at this in material, Control Shift and left click, this is the start of our washed denim material. In the next video, I'm going to build up the base texture of this and then really start to add in a lot of details with the mesh maps that we've baked as well. Okay, so in the next video, it's going to get a little bit more complicated, but if we organize ourselves, it's going to be really straightforward. So I'll see you guys there.